Well, G8 leaders have rejected Robert Mugabe's presidency as illegitimate. They're promising sanctions and have agreed to send UN envoys to help resolve the crisis.
Well, in the past half hour, Zimbabwe's foreign minister has repeated Mugabe's offer to talk about sharing power. That's something the MDC wants, but not on any terms. Tanya Page reports.
The world's richest leaders were united in branding Robert Mugabe's presidency as illegitimate. Criticism that's to be followed by sanctions.
This is the strongest possible statement. It shows the unanimity of the whole international community, reflecting the outrage people feel about the violence, the intimidation and the illegitimate holding of power by the Mugabe government.
The G8 also want to send UN envoys to mediate in Zimbabwe, a move that suggests frustration with the diplomatic efforts of South African President Thabo Mbeki, who has been trying to keep the two sides talking. Zimbabwe's government calls the G8 statement racist and an insult to African leaders. But the tough talk was welcomed by the opposition Movement for Democratic Change, whose leader Morgan Tsvangirai boycotted the presidential ballot because of ongoing violence. His party wants to negotiate, but with conditions.
We are clear in terms of our position to say that we are committed to a negotiated settlement, but that negotiated settlement has to come within the context of the resolution of the African Union and SADC, to say it has to be an expanded team that is going to superintend and shepherd the process to make sure that we guard against and we vaccinate the process against the vices and transgressions of Zanu PF.
In another rebuke to Mugabe's regime, the UN Security Council added its criticism.
When an election is conducted in an atmosphere of fear and violence, its outcome cannot have a legitimacy that is built on the will of the people. Consequently, the principle of democracy is at stake.
The mounting verbal and financial pressure has so far made little difference to ordinary Zimbabweans, who are still scratching a living out of a country that was once admired. Tanya Page, Aljazeera.
Well, joining me now is Lance Guma from the London-based SW Radio Africa. Thank you very much for joining us here on Al Jazeera. Very strong words there from the G8, calling Mugabe's regime illegitimate, and we're expecting sanctions to follow. But surely, without the support of the African Union, it means nothing.
Yeah, well, it's a very confusing issue because although they're talking about it as sanctions in broad, we're looking at targeted sanctions. We're looking at an arms embargo, travel restrictions, and a freezing of assets of members of the regime who are responsible for the violence. So essentially, there shouldn't be any disagreement because this is aimed at putting pressure for the violence to stop. But everyone is agreed that the government in Zimbabwe is illegitimate right now, and any pressure that will change the status quo is welcome.
Do you think there has been some reaction to that pressure now, the statement we had from Mugabe's foreign minister? Do you think there's a change?
I think the Zimbabwean government is playing politics. They were clearly aware they lost the March 29 elections, and they instituted a campaign of violence to try and win the June 27 runoff. Having had that smash and grab election, they're now talking about having a unity government. And we know from precedent, 1987, what Zanu PF means by a unity government is swallowing up the opposition. So clearly this is what Mugabe wanted, win the June 27 runoff and then talk about a unity government later, whereas this was supposed to be the agenda before the runoff.
Robert Mugabe has said that only God can displace him. What do you think it's going to take to get him out of power?
Well, look, I think those are the last kicks of a dying horse. This is a man who is clearly on his last legs, and the pressure is beginning to tell. He previously relied on a lot of African solidarity, but even this is waning away. You know, you have Botswana, Tanzania, and Uganda and several other African countries that have clearly stated they're not willing to recognize his government. And even their own observers from the AU, the SADC grouping, have all clearly said the election on June 27 did not reflect the will of the Zimbabwean people. So this is a man who is isolated, and I just think the statement that they're willing to form a unity government is really buckling under pressure.
In the short term, the G8 was talking about putting pressure on big businesses to get out of Zimbabwe. Do you think that will have any kind of impact?
Well, we had Royal Dutch Shell announcing that they were reviewing their operations in Zimbabwe. They have a joint venture with BP, where they supply 74 petrol stations in Zimbabwe. They say they're reviewing their position. Tesco, supermarket giant, they were buying £1 million worth of vegetables from Zimbabwe, and they're saying they're reviewing their operations. We had pressure being put on Barclays recently. A member of the Welsh Assembly wrote to the Barclays chief executive asking Barclays to review their position in Zimbabwe. So clearly the pressure is beginning to tell. I mean, we do have the likes of Standard Chartered, Anglo-American and the others still operating. But I think as you know, time progresses, the pressure is beginning to tell, and everyone is going to be reviewing their positions.
Lance Guma, fascinating stuff. We'll have to leave it there, I'm afraid, though. Thank you very much.